Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum. As mentioned, my name is Fatima. I'm a reporter with Channel 4 News. And just to be clear, I'm not linked to any of these organisations, I'm not linked to any of these candidates, so I'm here as your impartial chair. I do not live in this constituency, so I want to hear my voice as little as possible, and I'd like to get as many questions and comments from all of you, because one of these people is going to be your elected representative, and this is your opportunity. So the first thing I'm going to ask is for each of the candidates to give a brief introduction to themselves, 1 minute each please. Try and keep it nice and tight, because as much as we want to hear your life story, we really want to get into the issue. So I think we'll start from the very end. Ross Barlow, who's here for the Lib Dems.
Do I stand up or?
No, you don't need to stand up. I think everyone can see. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
great.
This microphone right here.
Yep, thank you.
Hello there. As you just heard, my name is Ross. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate. I first got involved with the Liberal Democrats because they were working hard in my local area. That is Harrow East. I got involved. We submitted 15 petitions over just the space of 6 months, because it was quite clear that this two-party ping-pong between Labour and the Conservatives was failing Harrow East. And I'm now very proud to stand before you and stand against these two. All clear now? Good. I'm proud to stand here and represent the Liberal Democrat cause, but more importantly, the local cause, the cause of local people, the people that I talk to on doorsteps day in, day out, who are being failed by the two parties to my left. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bob Blackman, the current MP here for the Conservatives. I'll pass you my microphone.
Thank you very much. I'm Bob Blackman. I'm the Member of Parliament for Harrow East and the Conservative candidate come the general election in May 2015. I've had the privilege for the last 4.5 years to represent Harrow East, and I take a very strong stance that I am Harrow East's representative in Westminster. I'm not Westminster's representative in Harrow. That means that I take up causes on behalf of the whole community. One of the benefits of this community is there's a widespread mixture of people from all different backgrounds, all different faiths, all different countries, and virtually every language spoken on the planet is present in Harrow East. So I take up causes on behalf of everyone. I have represented more than 17,000 individual cases since I was elected. Before being elected to Parliament, I served on the London Assembly for 4 years. I spent 24 years as a councillor in the London Borough of Brent, including 20 years as Conservative Group leader. And I have had a long background in business. I spent 19 years working for British Telecom and 11 years working for Unisys in the background. That means that I have a business background, a political background to represent the people. And what I will seek is a further 5-year term to carry on doing what I've been doing, which is working hard on behalf of every single one of the residents that I have the privilege to serve.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Uma Kumaran, who's here for the Labour Party.
Hello, I'm Uma. I'm the Labour candidate for next year's general election. Harrow is my hometown. This is where I grew up. I studied in 3 local schools, firstly Newton Farm in Rayners Lane, then Bentley Wood Girls' School in Stanmore, and finally St Dominic's Sixth Form. I currently volunteer in Norfolk Park Hospital as a radio presenter. That's the hospital that saved my dad's life a number of years ago, and this is my way of giving back to the community and making sure that I do my part for Harrow. I currently work in local government. I work in North London as a political advisor. Before this, I worked for Labour in national government for a minister, and before that I started off my career working for the NHS. I went to university in Queen Mary and I studied politics and also have a degree in public policy. Thank you.
So that round of applause was for all the candidates, I hope. So the way this is going to work is we've got just under an hour to talk through 3 different areas of questions, and I'm going to tell you what those 3 areas are. And let's try and keep to the areas, because I know you've got lots of different questions, but it's best if we try and structure this. So we've got from now until about 4:10 to talk through 3 different areas, and I'm going to ask for questions on each one. So the first is the public sector. That includes the NHS, education, schools, etc. The second is economy, welfare issues, and the third one is Islamophobia and racism in general, I guess. So without further ado, I'm going to ask for questions linked to the NHS, education, anything to do with the public sector. If you have got a question, please put your hand up and wait for the microphone to come to you. And the other thing is, I did hear a mobile phone go off. Right on cue, right on cue. Please, can we switch them on silent? It'd be great for you to all tweet, but it's very disruptive if we've got ringtones going off throughout. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is with regards to education specifically. Recently, the government published guidelines for what British values should be in schools, and then they used Ofsted to downgrade Muslim schools before these British values were put. Do you think that there's like a general vilification of Muslims in regards in the public sector based on kind of knee-jerk reactions on the media?
Okay, so this is linked to the so-called Trojan horse in Birmingham and then following East London. In case anyone didn't hear the question, it's to do with what are these guidelines about British values? Ofsted's downgraded Muslim schools. Is this vilification? Bob Blackman, let's start with you.
If I can get this to work.
Do you want to just speak so we can hear? Why don't you take that for a second?
Oh no, I think with it.
Okay,
Sorry,
yep.
Get the technology to work first would be a challenge. There's clearly a challenge in terms of providing faith-based schools right across this country. I have been a very strong supporter of all faith-based schools right across the spectrum, be it Christian, Jewish, Hindu or Muslim schools. And I believe it's absolutely right for parents to have the choice to exercise a choice for a faith-based education if that's what they want for their children. And the opportunity should be there for every faith to have that opportunity. Now, there are concerns about certain schools and a very small minority of people within the Muslim community who would use the opportunity to push their own particular agenda. Now, I don't think that's... And we heard a presentation earlier about what this organisation does, and I don't think an organisation like this would ever be guilty of that. So the key thing is this a lack of understanding, which I think is the first thing? Is it a lack of understanding of what those schools were offering? Is there a case to answer for saying that somehow the curriculum has been bypassed, that some particular secret agenda is being pushed? Or thirdly, is there an issue about the whole ethos of a particular school? Now, I take the view of saying that if you have an ethos of a school, which is fundamentally Islamic, then that's going to be part and parcel of the culture. That's why you choose to send your child to that school. Now then, if that's the basis, then it's very difficult to then say, well, sorry, you shouldn't have this culture, because that would be fundamentally wrong. So I'm deeply concerned that in certain instances, what is being done is to, frankly, through the media, is to vilify schools that have a fundamental Muslim ethos. And I think it's completely wrong. You've asked about British values. I think British values are very plain and straightforward. We talk about the maximum possible freedom under the law, the right to celebrate your religion, the right to free speech, obedience and allegiance to the country in which you live in, which is the United Kingdom, above all else, and then the rest that flows, a free press, the opportunity to fulfill your maximum potential, and the opportunity to excel to the limits that you can as an individual. I think all of those things are fundamental. Okay, I mean, you ask a very open question, so I'm trying to give you as full an answer as I possibly can.
Quite an extensive answer there. Uma, what are your thoughts on this situation?
Look, I think the term British values is quite a broad church of understanding. But look, even the Church of England have come out and said that they thought this is divisive and it undermines what's being taught in schools and especially unfairly attacks faith schools. I studied in a faith school here in Harrow for my sixth form. This was a school that was open to children of all religions to enter. I'd like to say I received a brilliant standard of education here in Harrow, and it's already working. Our systems work. Look, where there have been problems, they need to be addressed, but I don't think simply doing a tick box exercise and saying British values and sending in inspectors to determine what they think is a British value and what isn't is the way to address this. And I think it really, really is unfairly targeting Muslim communities. And I think it's, you know, using a few schools to then tarnish a whole range of faith schools is just simply unfair.
Okay, Ross?
Yeah, it was quite clear that when the Ofsted guidance was issued, the wording of it was talking about British values of tolerance and respect. And then it became quite clear that Ofsted may not be showing the same level of tolerance and respect that they are expecting from schools. That they turned up in a cultural context where every newspaper had talked about the Trojan horse scandal. You know, heaven forbid that parents have an influence on how schools teach their children. And yes, religious schools started to get stung by it. I know we're not supposed to just sort of let schools start to teach intolerance, and we need guidelines to implement that. But the way that these have been implemented, and the way that Ofsted inspectors have interpreted this advice, and the way that British values is labelled on top front row centre, bringing up all the pictures of the Daily Mail and the Sun talking about what they think British is, rather than the tolerant multicultural society that British people know they indulge in, it became very clear that Ofsted inspectors were not acting according to the guidance, they were acting according to the hysteria. And the guidance needed to be stronger, and we needed more checks on the Ofsted inspectors themselves, not just a focus on what the schools are doing wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. So it seems there's a lot more agreement between the three panellists than you might have expected, perhaps. More questions on health, public sector, education. So let's take a few at a time.
I think in addition to the Ofsted inspectors who are on a mission of their own, we also have the new chairman of the Charity Commission, who is also on a mission against Muslim charities. These two appointments are the most seriously damaging appointments from this government. And I would like to know from the three of you, what are we going to do about them? As you know, the Charity Commission has started now to left, right, and center, trying to restrict and ban all kinds of Muslim charities without any reason. For example, let me give you an example. Interpol, which has been investigated 4 times and cleared, is now again in the limelight. Interpol, because it is funding destitute and poor people in Palestine, it is in the eyesight of this. The chairman of the Charity Commission is an ex-Jackson Society chair who is known for his sympathies in that direction. We cannot have that, and we need our representatives to make a representation.
Okay, that's just a question from the young man. Very quick then, okay.
First one is to Mr. Blackman. Northwick Park Hospital saw the worst A&E waiting times in the country. Around 1,500 patients had to stay in the hospital before being handed over to the hospital staff. How would the Conservative Party reform this? I know that there is a new building, but this is not getting funded properly, and our staff are overworked. The second question, quickly, is to the Lib Dems. Sir, tripling the tuition fees, I think it's unfair. What do you think about that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good questions there. So there's several issues. Let's start with this question about the charities. So the question was, if Ofsted are vilifying Muslims in some way, there is a concern that the Charity Commission is also picking on Muslim charities unfairly. The chair is a Henry Jackson Society former official, and does this cause any concern? Bob, can you answer that question first of all?
Yeah, sure. The position with the Charity Commission is that they have a public duty to make sure that organisations that are registered charities are acting in line with the law. Now, the reality is that whoever you appoint to the chairmanship of such a body or to the executive of such a body, because of the way that public life works, they will have a particular view. But they have to act impartially. And if there is evidence that suggests that the Charity Commission are acting in an incorrect manner, and I can tell you that since I've been the Member of Parliament, I've had to refer one particular organisation, which I won't mention here in a public forum, to the Charity Commission for investigation. And despite a substantial amount of evidence to suggest that this organisation was acting improperly, they refused to investigate. So I have a very jaundiced view of the Charities Commission's ability to actually do a proper and effective job, which is what they're appointed to do. So, but clearly, if there is evidence that suggests in any way, shape or form that the Charity Commission is acting incorrectly, my role will be to highlight that and say, look, this is being treated unfairly, irrespective whether it's a Muslim organisation or any other.
Okay, Ross?
Yeah, it's fairly simple, really, that the Charity Commission needs to investigate based on... They need to pay attention to their own guidance more. They need to investigate based on the strict confines of the law, rather than an all-encompassing paranoia that has spread among investigative bodies. I don't think it's as overt as two completely different standards, but I think that we need to have a system where personal feelings are taken out of investigatory institutions, rather if it's Ofsted or the Charity Commission. I think there needs to be more input from diverse communities, from the communities who feel that personal prejudices are affecting what should be a codified rule of law investigation.
While we've got you, the young man asked about tuition fees and Lib Dem policy. This is one you're probably getting from lots of young people.
Yeah,
what do you have to say?
It's come up a couple of times. For me, tuition fees was the best of an incredibly bad situation. The actual policy itself was, and the background on the policy was, that Labour, after introducing tuition fees, commissioned the Brown Review. This review recommended the complete removal of the cap on tuition fees. It recommended a far more free market approach than what we got, and the Conservatives were full force behind it, and Labour had commissioned the review. So the Lib Dems were left in a very impossible position where we had to get as many concessions, we had to make this as good as possible, but it cost a heavy political cost. Now we have a system where there still is a cap. We have a system where you do not pay back a penny until you're earning over £21,000 a year. You have a system where your whole debt expires after 30 years. And so and you pay more interest on your debt the more if you're earning more money. We did as much as we could to make the new tuition fee system reflect as close to a graduate tax system as possible. Now, I know I can stand here all day and tell you how much better this new system is. I don't think that's actually the issue. I think the problem is that members of my party made a promise. And for all the good that breaking that promise did, they broke a promise. I didn't make that promise, but if I did, I would have kept it. And I personally feel that if you do make a promise, you should keep it. And if I had been in Parliament, even though this system is better, I would have voted against tuition fees.
They'll be holding you to your promises, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I hope they do.
Uma, can you just... well, there's two things here. One is this issue about the Charity Commission. The second question was about Northwick Park Hospital. Oh, it was specific. I'll come back to that. Okay, so on the Charity Commission. Yeah.
On the Charities Commission, it's something that's come up a few times when I've been talking to Muslim organisations. Many of you here have already met me because I've been meeting as many people and organisations within Harrow East as possible in the last year that I've been a candidate. And I think one thing is very clear from speaking to many organisations, and it's this issue of equal treatment and fairness. And I think it's not just in the Charities Commission, but across the board. So we've had this on schools, we're having it on the Charities Commission, and we're having it in a range of topics that we've discussed. And it's about one group feeling like they're being subjected to slightly differing treatment than others. And I think that's simply not fair. And when it comes to charity groups in particular, I mean, who can not think that the charity work that so many Muslim organisations within London and around the country are doing is good. And it's really, really unfair that some of these groups feel that actually they're being looked at through a lens, let's say, that's distorting what they're doing. And I think where these questions are arising, they do need to be answered. And actually, there needs to be more transparency about how these appointments are made to the Charities Commission. So how did someone become the head of it if they've already got certain views? And also, why are one group being singled out and whereas the other groups aren't? And I think these are all questions that this government really does need to answer.
Okay, let's go back to this question about the worst A&E times in the country at Northwick Park Hospital. I mean, it's one that we hear all over the country, but it seems to be a particular issue. It's happening under a Conservative-led coalition government, Bob Blackman.
Well, I mean, you're a very young man, so you don't remember some of the things that used to happen. We were promised a brand new hospital at Northwick Park by the Labour Party when they were seeking election in 1997. We're still waiting. What will happen next month or in the next few days is that the brand new wing, which will be the A&E and operating theatres, will open. That's £21 million worth of money delivered by a coalition government to provide top-notch facilities at Northwick Park. Now, there are several issues around the health service that we have concerns with. First is A&E waiting times, clearly and utterly unacceptable. Let's be clear, it's not a position which anyone should attempt to defend at all. However, we then have to say, so what is causing the A&E waiting times? Can I tell you, the decision was taken by the management of the trust to close the A&E departments at Central Middlesex. Now there, I can tell you, the reality is that if you were ill, the place to go was Central Middlesex. Why? Because we had brilliant doctors and nurses standing around waiting for someone to arrive. Whereas at Northwick Park, we had queues of people wanting to get in. So I said to the management quite clearly that what should happen is that if you close the A&E at Central Middlesex, we should have an absolute guarantee, and I went with Barry Gardner, the MP for Brent North as well on this. If you're going to do this, you must transfer all the medical staff to Northwick Park so that we remove the waiting time problems. Now, that hasn't happened. So actually, we're in the position whereby we're in the world's worst basis, where they've closed the A&E at Central Middlesex, but not increased the facilities at Northwick Park. So that's the first issue that we have to deal with. The second issue is the fact that people can't get an appointment at their GPs. So if you're ill, where do you go? Your GP won't see you. So where do you go? You go to an A&E and you join the queue. And I've seen it firsthand. I have been in the queue to be treated at A&E. So I know from a personal perspective how bad that is. So it's not a case of a politician coming along and saying, oh, well, yeah, great. I have personally suffered, so I know what it's like. I have made representations to the management about getting the control of Northwick Park Hospital for A&E in particular back on track. And that's key. We do have a problem that GPs in this area are open more or less 5 days a week. They don't do out-of-hours calls. They don't open at weekends, except in certain cases. And what this part of the country is going to get, which will be the first of any part of the country, is 7-day-a-week opening of GPs, so you can see a GP when you need to. That will take the pressure off A&E quite dramatically.
Gonna have to stop you there. Thank you very much. Now, you've mentioned GPs, so for our next question, we're going to go to one.
Thank you for coming. So I'm actually a GP trainee who's based at Northwick Park. I've worked both in GP and A&E at Northwick Park, and I've seen what's happened before and after the closure. And I think my colleagues also mentioned that there's been a terrible waiting times. 33% and 27% of patients were not seen within 4 hours. And I think it's a combination of things in that there's not enough beds, so that you will have doctors waiting around to see patients, and there's not actually beds to see patients in. You mentioned the new A&E wing. Actually, it has the same number of beds as the current A&E. So the only difference is that they're all single rooms. Second thing is actually GPs. So GPs actually see 50 to 60% extra patients as an emergency list every day. So we will do our set clinic, and we have walk-in where we will work through our lunchtime, seeing 6-7 patients on top of what we see. We are overworked and struggling. And if we see a patient who needs to go into A&E, we refer them to Northwick Park, and we're told, actually, Northwick Park is on divert because they're so full they can't take any more patients. And then to add on top, we've got Hammersmith, Central Middlesex are both closed, and then Ealing will be closing too. So actually, how are you going to protect the people of Harrow? Because everybody's putting pressure on Harrow, but we've got an A&E that has the same number of beds. We actually have enough doctors, it's just not enough places to see them. And it just seems like there's been a lot of stuff happening and not enough planning.
Bob, can you just very briefly come back on that, because that's someone on the front line there.
Situation is actually not changed. I mean, I can tell you, I went to A&E at Norfolk Park Hospital in February 2013. And I had to wait from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 2 o'clock in the morning. So this is not new. So you know, let's be clear, this is not new. This is something that's been going on for a very long time. And one of the problems is, and I repeat the problem, is when people get ill in this area, they go to A&E rather than their GP. And I'm talking about GPs in Norfolk Park Hospital because there are surgery positions for GPs set up in Norfolk Park Hospital which aren't ever used. They were set up a long time ago, they're never used, those facilities. So the facilities exist. We also have in Harrow a position whereby, especially in this part of Harrow, Harrow East is a bit different, but this part of Harrow, where we have a large number of single-handed GPs in their practices. So the practicality of them opening more than 5 days a week is limited. In 2004, the Labour government gave GPs a contract that they could only dream about. You could open 5 days a week, you get paid a lot of money, you don't have to do out-of-hours cover, you don't have to do weekend cover, and we've suffered as a consequence to it. What we are doing in the coalition government now is saying we want 7-day-a-week cover for when people are ill, so they go and see their GP to take the pressure off A&E. Equally, of course, we do have the urgent care centres, both at Norfolk Park and at Central Middlesex, which looks after a number of people. Not enough, I agree. I agree there needs to be more beds at Norfolk Park Hospital, and pressure is being put on the moment that both the management and through the health department to make sure that the right number of beds are provided. Now, it's not something where you can wave a magic wand to make happen overnight, because you've got to have the nurses, the doctors, and the facilities. But believe you me, the pressure is on, because it's unacceptable that people are waiting the sort of length of time when they're badly ill that we're suffering at the moment.
Okay, we are pushed for time, so I'm going to have to move on, and we've got several questions. Just to save on time, I'm also going to start taking questions on the economy and welfare issues, so if you've got those, please come back with those now. 3 people we're going to take questions from, so lady in the blue scarf, lady in the cream scarf here, and the gentleman here.
Okay, I'm just going to bring it back to education again. Speaking on behalf of teachers, as a teacher myself, and also speaking on behalf of students up and down the country, I feel. I've been in education for a long time and I've seen lots of changes and reforms. There are quite a few issues that are currently been in the limelight since your esteemed colleague, Mr. Gove, has been in the office, should we say. One of the statements I'd like a response from Mr. Blackman, if you would. How do you respond to the statement that 50% of teachers would like to leave the profession? That's national figures. So 50% of the teachers would like to leave the profession in the current climate. And what are we going to do about ensuring students of all backgrounds, regardless of their demographic, their religious beliefs, their ethnicity, are going to fulfil their potential? Because from where I'm standing currently, all we can see is the gap between wealthy and affluent students and the less privileged widening. The gap is becoming a gulf. Also, what are you going to do about addressing teachers' workloads? Teachers' workloads, like I feel any public sector workload at the moment in the current climate, under the current government, is amplified and causing people to want to leave the profession. Again, you also have already mentioned tuition fees. I speak to young people on a daily basis who say they don't want to go to university because they don't want to end up in £30,000 of debt when they leave their university course. And I understand that it's a system that's helping people pay back what they've borrowed. However, if it's putting people off from the age of 13, 14, 15, where are the aspirations for these young people?
Thank you. Thanks very much. That's a great question. So, several questions there. I'm just going to take a couple more. So, lady there. Please try and keep it brief because we have got very limited time.
I'm Nana Asante. I'm the TUS candidate for Harrow East, and I hope that next time, in the spirit of non-partisanship, I will also be given the opportunity to answer the questions. But I wanted to make a point about the way Muslim organizations are being targeted. And I would suggest that this demands a campaign. We have the Equality Act for a reason, and it is up to us as people to use it. And because neither Ofsted nor the Charity Commission are above the law. and we need to hold them accountable. They cannot be targeting people without us, and they only do it because we allow it. So we need to speak up and we need to be bold about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And the gentleman there.
I work there, I'm a consultant orthodontist. Morale in that hospital is at an all-time low. I've been working within the trust for 13 years, and over a period of time it has unfortunately gradually continued to go downhill. One of the issues I think you have in terms of the A&E is that the plan is to appoint 8 new consultant A&E into the department. Being able to recruit people is becoming much more of a significant issue, and when Jeremy Hunt turns around and says he's not going to give individuals who work within the health service a 1% pay rise, when MPs are getting an 11% pay rise, for whatever reason, yes, how do you expect us as clinicians working within the system to view it?
Okay. Uma, I'm going to ask you to come back on a few of those points briefly. Sure. The issue of Muslim organisations being targeted, and the issue about education, teachers facing a massive workload. What is it the Labour Party would do differently?
On teachers, I think I have complete empathy for you. I'm a school governor here in Harrow. I've seen firsthand the effect that Michael Gove's disastrous reforms have had. I have been in meetings where teachers have been teaching 3 different classes, all in the same school, 3 different sets of curriculum. How you expect someone to keep up with that amount of workload is frankly unimaginable. I think this government's allowed him to put his own personal views and his own authoritarian take on what education should look like at the forefront, and he's damaged our...
What is it you're going to do differently there? Because we can all bash Michael Gove here, but what is it you're going to do differently?
Firstly, we need more teachers into our school system. Here in Harrow, we've got the most overcrowded schools in London. We definitely need to have more teachers coming on board. But actually, we need to let the teaching profession look like a field that someone really wants to get involved on. And what you're saying to me isn't something that's unique to you, I'm afraid. There's quite a few teachers saying the same thing. And I think it really does take a government who's got vision on this. So I could outline various Labour policy on it, but I think I'll keep it short. Mick mentioned I sent a 17-page document outlining all our policies on it. But actually, you need someone who's willing to listen to you, to speak to teachers firsthand and find out what it is you want from the system, because I don't think that's happening at the moment, and actually have a system that works for teachers, parents and children alike. If I come back on the A&E, which I never got to respond to. Yeah. I don't think what we've been told today is a complete truth at all. The decision to close 2 nearby A&Es lies with the government and the government alone. It's nothing to do with middle managers. I mean, they can shake their head all they want, but this is completely untrue. The 2 A&Es that have closed has put extra pressures on Northwick Park at scales unprecedented. Northwick Park already serves Harrow and Brent. That's 500,000 people. With the closure of 2 additional A&Es, that's nearly 1.9 million people that are relying on this A&E. I'm not saying this to you as a politician or someone asking for your vote. I'm saying this to you as someone who lives in Harrow, who's grown up here and who's had personal experiences of this hospital. I mentioned that Northwick Park's A&E saved my dad's life, and this is true. This was 10 years ago that this happened. He was having a heart attack, and a passing doctor happened to spot him, and he was saved within minutes. Now, if this same situation was happening today, I'm not sure I'd be able to tell you this story, and I'm not sure it would have had the positive outcome it did have. This is the realities that people in Harrow are facing. 1,400 people waited 30 minutes or more in an ambulance. That's in an ambulance before they could even be transferred into our A&E. We're 100 beds short. We've got over 33,000 people waiting 4 days or more to see their GP. We've heard about a bigger building opening, but we also heard that we're not having extra resources by way of beds or even more doctors. And we heard from a gentleman over there who's a doctor. I used to recruit doctors for the NHS. Even then, this was in the Labour years, it already was difficult because there are certain fields like A&E which people don't want to work in anyway because it's long hours, it's highly pressured environment, and actually, quite frankly, they're having to deal with some things that most of us just wouldn't even want to see. And what we're seeing now is an NHS that's on its knees. It's an NHS that this government have allowed to become privatised and fragmented beyond repair. And quite frankly, as an MP who's been the MP here for 5 years, to just point out what's wrong and what's not happening is not good enough. We need someone who would have taken decisive action on this and actually speaking out, not just now when it's got to breaking point, but actually put a stop to this way beforehand, and that's not happened. And if I was your MP, I'd have been speaking about this from day one and not leave it until it was on its knees and not leave it until we're in a public hustings to say, oh yes, I think this is wrong.
Bob, I'm going to let you come back on those points, but briefly, yep. Ross, first of all, I mean, your party is in this coalition. Your party is a part of the government that's overseen education and healthcare reforms, the result of which is you've got professionals here today complaining about how difficult it's become. What do you have to say on that?
Well, it's the horse trading. It's the coalition giving and taking of policies. And you look at these bills and you can clearly point out which policies have come from the Lib Dems and which have come from the Tories. The Liberal Democrats, when they came to an education bill, said we want a pupil premium, we want money put into schools proportionate to how many pupils at that school come from a disadvantaged background. And that has pumped £11 million into Harrow schools. We're the ones who are pushing for free school meals, because a child performs better if they have been well fed at lunchtime. And so children are now getting well fed every day and they get a better education as a result of it. Unfortunately, the downside is that we start to see Michael Gove's education agenda, and we would love to be in a position of being in government and being able to tell Michael Gove where to go. I'd very much like to be in a position to tell Michael Gove where to go, but that's not the nature of coalition. We fought for quite a large amount of funding, and in response, we had to take some horrible, horrible policies from Michael Gove. I wish it could have been different, but I'm not ashamed of the fact that thanks to a Liberal Democrat policy, something that we have pushed for in government, the pupil premium is in place, it is expanding, it's getting more and more investment into schools in deprived areas. We now have a system also where we are paying apprentice teachers more and more to encourage more people into the profession. I know my partner works at a school, and she says that if she were to convert from being a lab tech to a teacher, she'd get paid £25 a year to train to be a teacher. That is getting more people into schools, and now all I wish is that we could have an education policy that would give teachers more freedom, more room to move with their own creativity and respond to their own pupils' needs, because no one knows more than a teacher what their pupils are going to respond to, and this tick box exercise from up on high cannot continue anymore. That is what I'd like to see moving forward on education. Okay. But at the moment where we are now, I think is a mix of good and bad, and I'm very proud of the good.
Okay, thanks very much. Bob, I'm going to ask you to come back on several points. You're being accused of not speaking out until the hospital reaches breaking point. There is the point the lady made about the education sector and education reforms, and that's your party that's overseen that. So, I mean, can you just come back on both of those points? You're not doing enough as an MP, and these public sector services have reached breaking point.
Let's deal with education first. I was a chairman of the school governance when we had the last Labour government, and we had every day a new policy arriving from the Department for Education telling the teaching staff what to do. Teachers, by 2010, were at absolute breaking point. Let's be quite clear. Under a Labour government, we had the edicts from on high saying, you will do this, you'll change that, and it changed from one day to the next. It was an absolute veritable nightmare. Now, I have to say, the education...
Hold on a second.
Well, you may disagree with it, I'm sorry, but it happens to be the fact. So we're in the position whereby you're making a concern about the last 4 years. I'm telling you what happened over the previous 13 years prior to that.
Can someone give that lady a microphone so we can hear her point properly and have a proper discussion?
Sorry to interrupt, but with all due respect to this partisanship that it's Labour's fault and it's not us that we did it and we had a policy on our doorstep. Since I've been in education for the last 7 years, policies have changed every year or every 2 years with new curriculums, and it's a policy between Labour and Conservatives. It's not just a Labour point. So what are you going to do as a Conservative if elected to change that and to have consistency?
Okay, well, I'm coming on to the issues. The new Secretary of State for Education, set out her stall very strongly, and that is she wants to reduce the workload for teachers, which I think is absolutely critical. Teachers are the key element to the profession and very important in terms of driving forward education. You mentioned, the lady here mentioned the issue of students not wanting to go on to higher education. We heard about tuition fees. Well, the fact is, more young people are going to university than ever before. More than 1 in 2 now go to university. So all of the horrendous stories about how dreadful it was going to be under tuition fees, etc., have actually been born to be incorrect and false. The second issue is, of course, that more young people from state schools now go to the Oxbridge and Russell Group universities than ever before. So the inequality is being reduced. It's still there. It's still a fact of if you go to a private or public school, you're more likely to be able to go to these schools, to these universities, but it is being reduced. And part and parcel, which Ross didn't come on to, was the bursaries that are introduced as a result of having tuition fees mean that people from disadvantaged backgrounds don't pay a penny to go to university. So that is a big advantage to those people who are on very low income. So I think the issue is it perfect? No. Do we want a period of, I think, of settled environment? Yes, we should. I think the one thing that I'm critical about the education service, above all else, is we should have one board of examinations rather than multiplicity of examinations, because I think that inbreeds selection by schools of soft options. The issue about A&E and so on, which I just mentioned, the reality is that prior to 2010, we had the Darcy Review of London, which you'll remember, I'm sure, and that was going to lead to 9 A&E departments closing in London. And Andrew Lansley, when he became Secretary of State for Health, said, no, stop. If any A&E department is going to be closed, it will be closed on clinical grounds only, not on any other grounds. We as a party, we as a coalition, have ring-fenced the NHS spending. We've increased NHS spending every single year. The Labour Party wanted to cut NHS spending. And Andy Burnham, their spokesman, said it was irresponsible to not reduce NHS spending. The final issue that I just mentioned is the pay rise for staff. If you check the records, I am one of the signatories that says that if you have a recommended level of increase for people that, where there's an independent body, review body, then NHS staff should get their full increase as recommended by the independent body. That's not what my party wants to do, but I'm saying that's what I'm doing.
I'm going to have to stop you there. It's quite a bit, because I want to come back to the lady, the teacher, and there was a lady at the back who was... Did you want to say something? Yep, okay, so just very briefly...
Just very briefly to respond. I've worked for more than 15 years in education, and I've seen the Labour government and what they did to education and how they actually gave teachers autonomy. They had a conversation with teachers and said what they wanted to have in partnership with what teachers and schools needed. What we've seen under a Tory regime, and I'm going to call it a regime because it's what we've had inflicted upon us as teachers and schools. We haven't had a conversation. It's not been a dialogue. We've had inflicted upon us 1950s education system, which Michael Gove which was his only experience of education, because he doesn't work in the education sector. He's never known that. He's inflicted a 1950s British education system to the entire population in a 21st century, diverse, multicultural Britain. And I'm standing here, 15 years in education plus, saying it doesn't work. Saying it doesn't serve our students, it doesn't serve our staff, it doesn't serve staff morale, it doesn't serve the education profession. And I'm telling you it doesn't work, and you will have mass exodus of staff and teachers who have come into teaching for the love of education, for the betterment of students, to make a difference to students' lives. And that is being crushed on a day-to-day basis at the front line. You may well have been a governor, but that's very different from being at the front line with 30 children, hour on hour, on a day-to-day basis. And until you've experienced that and you want those students to do well, and that is your priority, then whatever your Tory government will inflict upon us is not going to be productive or positive for the education in this country.
Okay, thanks very much for your point.
There's this one.
If you want a statistic of a student do not want to go further studying because they cannot pay the debt, I can give you numbers goes to over 10,000. And I can take you to the houses that plus my own son, who is very, very intelligent, cannot go ahead because of that problem. And also the demonstration happened, a disabled child being pulled away from the street, and they didn't allow him to speak out. And I want to know freedom of speech, where is it? And the other question is, do you have a power really to change what the people are demanding?
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to take one more question because we haven't got very much time before I break. So just one more question. Anything to do with the public sector, welfare, economy? This side of the room's gone very quiet. Yep. Someone who hasn't spoken yet, please. No? You want some time to think? Yes, sir. So just wait for the microphone, just 1 second.
My question is a very simple question. Now, the latest I've heard is the North Harrow Library is going to be closed. Now, I find it incredible that the Labour, the Labour Party and the Labour Council, which is in power, is decided to close fundamental things like North Harrow Library and others libraries are going to be closed. It is disgraceful, and I do think for this community, we use libraries quite often. To close that, I do think that is scandalous.
Okay, thanks very much for that question. So, Uma, could you come back on this issue about students not going to university because they don't want to be in debt? Because it was actually the Labour Party that first introduced tuition fees. And then secondly, the North Harrow Library closing, issues to do with libraries all over the place, but this is a very specific local one.
Sure. With regards to tuition fees, it's been levelled that it was the Labour Party that introduced tuition fees, and I personally would stand by that. If we want a world-class education system, we need a system that's fully funded, and we need to have a system that is able to provide all sorts of different services and all sorts of different courses as it does today. And to do that, yes, you have to pay to use university and to go to university, but £9,000 a year is frankly, you know, beyond the reach of so many people. I came out of university with £9,000 as my entire student loan. So my 3 years of education and living costs, and it was £9,000. If I was to go to university now, that would just be my 1 year's fee. On top of that, if you want to study for a master's, you're talking into the tens of thousands of pounds. So children are coming out of university with £30,000, £40,000 worth of debt on their heads that they, you know, before they've even got a mortgage, before they've even got their first job, and before they've even planned what they're going to do with the rest of their lives. The Liberal Democrats all held up a pledge card for the last election saying they pledged not to put tuition fees up. We can find every single Liberal Democrat MP has broken that pledge. The Labour Party have got a firm policy in this. We will reduce tuition fees if elected in the next government. We've said something like a maximum cap of £6,000, but I personally still think that's too high, and I will be fighting to get that reduced. On the issue of libraries.
North Harrow Library
Yes, I'm glad you raised that. I learnt to read here in our local libraries. Rayners Lane was my local library growing up. It's a very clear thing what's happening here in Harrow, and that's that this government have cut £75 million from the budget of Harrow Council. Okay, that's £75 million that's already been taken from this council's budget. That's a real terms cut of 40% of the overall budget. Our council looks after a number of areas, from looking after people with mental health needs, looking after our rubbish collection, our street lighting, all sorts of things that come under the budgets of the council.
In response to that, the chief executive of Harrow was out-sacked. They brought him back with £100,000. What is a priority? A North Harrow Library or a salary of a chief executive who they got rid of?
Okay, just very briefly come back on that.
Okay, sure. I take your point. Look, I work in local government. I've worked in local government for the last 4 years. I've worked for a council that's lost £350 million from its budget. It's happening across the board and across the country. This government, frankly, don't understand the invaluable work that local government does. And here in Harrow, they've made these huge cuts to it. To do with the chief executive, if Harrow didn't have a chief executive, we'd be the only council in the whole of London that didn't have a chief exec. That is actually a fact. And also, our chief exec brought in £1 million worth of business in the last number of years. I think it's something like £8 million that he brought in of direct business and investment into Harrow. And I think that's really, really important. Like the chief exec topic has been used as a party political issue, but actually what it comes back down to is £75 million worth of cuts coming out of Harrow. That's a decision of the two gentlemen sitting to my right, their government, their coalition government, that's decided to cut £75,000 from Harrow.
Okay, but very briefly, we haven't got very long, so I'm going to ask the two gentlemen sitting on the right for 30 seconds each to come back on libraries and to come back on the issue of students being put off going to university because of debt.
Well, with students being put off going to university because of debt, I think that the main driver behind this are people with a very clear agenda to say, look how horrible it is that the Lib Dems and the Conservatives have put up student loans, rather than actually engaging with the students who will be taking on university tuition, because it is not paid up front. It is not a debt that gets your mortgage cancelled. It is not a problem. It is not a debt that you repay the moment you graduate. It is something you only repay once you're earning over 21,000. There is absolutely no barriers to someone of a low-income family going to university, except the barriers put up by people like the Labour Party who want to complain and who want to say, oh, it's all terrible. The truth of the matter is, if you go to university today, you do not pay a penny until you have graduated and are earning over 21,000, and then after 30 years, the debt is cancelled. There's no barrier, and I will happily go to the
Do you even know the
We're
repayments?
going to have to stop. Bob, very briefly, libraries are having to close all over the country because councils are having to cut back on their budgets.
That's a decision to be taken at local level. What I can tell you is this. As far as I'm concerned, libraries are the lifeblood of a local community. They are a requirement for not just yourselves,
so why don't you
but
stop
young
your
children,
government from cutting 75 million from Harrow?
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you, so don't interrupt me and stop lying to this audience.
I'm not lying.
The reality
you
is,
can Google it. 75 million
well,
cut
I look
from
forward.
Harrow.
Okay, fine. Answer this question then. Will you, if you're elected and a Labour government is elected,
talk to me.
suddenly
You don't need to
donate
shout at me.
£75 million to Harrow Council? No, you won't. And if you do, you're lying to this audience. So let's get back to the reality of the libraries.
Ridiculous.
The key is that this council should be safeguarding community facilities, such as libraries, for the benefit of all you people, the people that need them to study in, and above all else, the fact they need to be local so that people can walk to them rather than having to journey long distances to use them. It's a deliberate decision to actually put all these services out, to say we're going to close all these services to create great fear in the community, rather than streamlining their administration, taking the right decisions at a central level to actually reduce expenditure at the centre, looking at that civic centre. That civic centre is an absolute outrage. Why is it that suddenly, at the civic centre, they could accommodate a whole school in the civic centre and then claim poverty? It's a nonsense. Harrow Council has been badly administered for a long time, and I blame politicians of all sides, and above all else, the council officers, who I don't have a lot of time for, because I don't think they're very good in serving you in the public that should be served.
Okay, thanks very much. We're going to have to pause there, a 10-minute break, and we'll be back just as it was getting heated, so you've got a chance to calm yourselves down. Okay, I think it looks like there's a few people yet to come in, but let's make a start and they can just make their way in slowly afterwards. So we're moving on to two themes now, which are Islamophobia and foreign policy. So questions firstly on Islamophobia, then foreign policy. No, I haven't missed out the economy. You're very right. What I was going to say is, before we do that, there was a gentleman who said he has a question on the previous theme, so we're going to go to that. So, the gentleman here, and just after he speaks, if anyone has something on economy or welfare or something really burning they want to say from the previous themes, this is the only round I'm going to let you do that.
This question is for all of you. It's in relation to the budget cutting. Harrow Council has decided to cut £1 million budget from the voluntary organisations, which are doing marvellous job.
Sorry, this is the council?
Council.
Yeah.
Harrow Council has decided to cut £1 million from the voluntary organisation services, like Mind in Harrow, the main cap, who are doing very critical, really, services, who are providing. So what are you going to do to prevent that? And there's a petition going now. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much for your question. The lady in pink scarf.
How can we improve the number of well-paid jobs here in Harrow, especially for younger people?
Okay, improving well. And any other questions on economy or welfare? Yes, sir.
A simple question, I have go back to about, the resident of Harrow. We gradually becoming all people of Harrow becoming gradually our prisoner. Like we have a very, the building, big buildings surrounding Harrow area. Since I'm living here since 30 years, Labour Party or Conservative, I'm working for Labour Party for a long time. But nobody have done anything for Harrow 20 years. Since 20 years, there's no nursery, no school. They haven't built any school over here. There's no surgery. If they open a little bit more doctor surgery, then less is a pressure on the A&E. And we are really becoming a prisoner like a people are Jammu Kashmir. The people are Jammu Kashmir. Okay. And what is the policy about, that's about all of them, the policy are Jammu Kashmir people.
Okay, we'll come to foreign policy later, so let's save that one. So 3 questions there. One is to do with budget cuts at the council level, voluntary services. The second one is how can we get better paid jobs, especially for younger people? And the third one is about the lack of investment in Harrow, no new schools, surgery, etc. Let's start from the very right. Ross.
Okay, about the council budget and what these two were very loudly getting across was that, yes, whichever government was in power, budget cuts are still necessary. They're not pretty, they're not enjoyable to do. But this council has a lot of areas that, and I've read the consultation, are not mentioned at all. Like the £2 million communications budget, which is in current form is untouched. Their budget for consultants to analyse whether the state of the roads and the state of the trees, which should be your local councillor's job. That budget remains untouched. There are huge levels of waste and unnecessary hires going on in Harrow Council that can be cut instead of these very devastating frontline services. But unfortunately, the Labour Council appears to have taken an easy way out, cutting very necessary frontline services, knowing that they can blame those nasty coalition people for having to pass down a budget cut when they know very well that anyone in power would have had to have done so.
Okay, Ross, just let's, in terms of well-paid jobs for younger people, because that's not something that we can blame on the council, is it?
That is indeed not. And as a young person with a not very well-paid job, I'm very eager to... If anyone's hiring, by the way. Unfortunately, yeah, we've seen the economy recovering and we've seen average wage levels growing larger than inflation, but we haven't seen that inequality really dropping that in the way that it really needs to. Now, we've put in place a lot of things to help young people onto the job ladder. We have an apprenticeship scheme which is doing incredibly well. I think it's quadrupled the number of apprenticeships that are available to young people. It's paying local businesses to train young people and giving young people that salary. I'd like to see the salary of an apprentice rise, and I would also like to see an increased investment in the apprenticeship scheme, because that's how you get young people on the first step of the ladder. Believe me, as someone who has a very small amount of experience in the area that I want to make a career in, the number one thing I get with every job application I send out, we want to see more experience. Everyone wants more experience, and anything the government can do to pay for that experience, to get young people the skills they need to flourish in the career of their choosing, is what's going to raise average wage levels for the younger people in society.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. So, well-paid jobs for younger people, and also this issue of not enough investment in Harrow. There's not enough new schools, surgeries, infrastructure, etc.
Right, so starting with the employment position, Harrow East, as opposed to the rest of Harrow, is basically a dormitory area. People live there and go and work somewhere else. The reality is that the unemployment rate in Harrow East is now 1.9%. We have a record number of people actually working, more people working than ever before, more women working than ever before. The youth unemployment rate has plummeted because young people are getting jobs straight away, and so that's good news. Most of our people who live in this constituency commute either to other parts of Harrow, to Barnet, or into central London, where the job opportunities are legion. London is booming, and the job opportunities are huge. Now, there's more to be done. One of the problems about Harrow is that the number of businesses actually located in Harrow is reducing. That has a knock-on effect because business rates aren't being paid to the local authority. So there is a problem. And One of the areas that is an opportunity here is for Harrow and Wealdstone Station to be used for Crossrail 2, and then that will regenerate dramatically the Wealdstone area, and that is a policy being pursued by the Conservative-led government and by the Mayor of London. So I think the opportunities are going to be there. It takes time for development to take place. You mentioned the issue of school places. 15 primary schools are being expanded across Harrow to provide new facilities, thanks to £70 million worth of money funding that's come from the coalition government for building new school places. I was instrumental in making sure that that happened for the Borough of Harrow. I didn't do it all myself, but what I can tell you is 2.5 years ago, Harrow Council, under a Labour administration, failed to submit even a bid for the money that was required. And I had to get the DFE, Michael Gove et al., to scrape together some money to get some extra facilities for Harrow. Then, when we got a proper bid on the table, we got £70 million for it. There is a need for a further 10 schools, 6 secondary and 4 primary, to be built in the Borough of Harrow over the next 4 to 5 years. And if I'm re-elected as the MP, I'll be at the forefront of making sure we get the money from the government to build those facilities so that children in this borough have the opportunity to exceed and excel in the way they wish.
Okay, thanks very much. Uma, both those points, jobs and building in Harrow itself.
With the point about jobs, I think it's easy to look at statistics and think all is all right. But when I'm out speaking to people on the doorsteps, what you'll find is that too many people are in low-paid jobs and their money is not stretching to the end of the month. So we've got more people working for longer hours in low-paid jobs than ever before. The cost of living is rising, but wages aren't rising. Wages are stagnant. And that's something that this government's failed to address. The Labour Party have called for pledged for an increase in the national minimum wage, and it will go up to £8 if Labour are elected. One of the major problems as well is in this so-called recovery is the rise of 0 hours contracts. So people being forced to take employment for jobs that don't have security, and that actually they're forced to take these or have the threat of losing whatever benefits they get in return. And I think that's unfair as well. Too many young people also. So we talked about graduates and university fees not being a hindrance. Actually, to go back to that point, there are more young people that aren't able to pay their student loans than ever before. The number of graduates not in graduate employment has skyrocketed, and the number of graduates who are not in graduate employment even after 5 years has doubled as well. So the whole point for raising tuition fees was to actually make it easier, make the university system better and actually make more job opportunities possible. But that hasn't happened, and what we've had is where we've seen, they've mentioned people not being able to pay off their loans overall. But coming back to this a fair day's work should have a fair day's pay. That's something the Labour Party's long been talking about. We need a recovery that works for the many and not just the few at the top. And that comes back down to addressing problems about jobs, so jobs that have a secure future for people, jobs that aren't forcing people to get into 0 hours employment, and jobs that pay fairly for a day's work.
Okay, thanks very much. So we're going to move on to the topics. I'm going to tie them together. So any of the Islamophobia or foreign policy issues, questions on that, and I will leave some time at the end for anything that doesn't come under those topics. If there's an other question you have, so save those for the end. Islamophobia and foreign policy questions only. Let's take a round of 3 first of all. So,
hi all. In the last month, I want to talk about I want to ask about Islamophobia. Just in the last month, we've heard some of the things that have happened to Muslim charities. The largest Muslim charity in the UK, actually Islamic Relief, was considered to be a terrorist organisation or terrorist group by the UAE. The government hasn't proactively spoken out, or it's doing things so behind closed doors. The Daily Mail decided to describe a teacher who assaulted a pupil, but the Daily Mail described her as a Muslim teacher who assaulted the child. That doesn't happen to any other religion. When it comes to schools with a majority Muslim population in East London who are downgraded because they were considered, that kind of thing was considered front page worthy. But 11 rural schools had the exact same problem and were downgraded, but nothing happened with it. And more recently, Theresa May, just this week, talked about how radicalization is taking place behind closed doors, and the first thing she said was in mosques. Now, with this background of anti-Muslim rhetoric coming from all parts of society, looking like it's passing the dinner table test, anyone can talk about it so easily. How do we ensure, and I mean properly ensure, that this is stopped at all levels and the Muslim community does not feel under threat? And what would you do to raise that profile of Islamophobia and not just focus on general hate crime? But Islamophobia is something that's really affecting our community. How do we deal with it?
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, and then the two ladies here.
I'd like to ask a question about how you would respond to a potential situation in which you had another type of Operation Protective Edge. So I'd like to tell you, I'll read some of the kind of statistics to you in terms of what's happened, and I'd like to see what your response is and how, if you were in power, how you would, or if you were then elected, how you would respond to that type of situation. So, you know, over 2,000 Palestinians have died. The UN estimates the vast majority are civilians. Over 18,000 housing units have been destroyed. 66 Israeli soldiers have been killed, 7 Israeli civilians as well. The recent vote in the House of Commons on this particular, on the recognition of a Palestinian state was overwhelmingly supported, but there were members of potentially the Tory party, including yourself, Bob Blackman, that voted against the recognition of a Palestinian state. So I'd like your comments and the comments of the rest of the panel on this particular issue, how you would respond to what is going on at the moment and another situation where something similar happened.
Okay, Uma, first of all, can you come back on both of those points? So just to clarify the question for anyone who didn't hear, one is about this background of anti-Muslim rhetoric in lots of fields. How should you actually stop this at all levels? What can be done? And the second question is to do with the situation in Gaza, Palestine and Israel. What if we had another situation like Operation Protective Edge? Do you support the recognition of a Palestinian state?
On Islamophobia, I've spoken to a number of you about this. Let me start by outlining my views on it. I personally don't like the use of the word Islamophobia, because it's not a phobia. You know, a phobia is when you're scared of spiders. Islamophobia is something far deeper than that. It's people having prejudiced views against a certain group of people based on their faith. And that's not a phobia, that's downright racism. I'd like to see the Racial and Religious Hatred Act be reviewed. Labour have pledged to do this, and I firmly support that. And I'd like to see Islamophobia incorporated into it, and it treated in the same way that we treat any other race crimes, the way that we treat anti-Semitic incidents as well. And I'd want to see Islamophobia be brought up on par with that as well. And I think, you know, any forms of racism should just not be tolerated, this included. Here in Harrow, I'm so proud that we have such a diverse and multicultural seat. We are statistically the most diverse borough in the entire country. We live peacefully side by side. You know, we have a great and flourishing community. Let us not create divisions where there are none. And we should have, you know, we should have an MP and we should have a representative who speaks on behalf of the many in our community. Moving on to the next point about Palestine. I support the recognition of Palestine as a state. This is not only Labour Party policy, but this is also my personal viewpoint. My parents came here as a result of a civil war and an armed struggle. I understand how important the freedom movement is, and I believe that recognition and statehood, is not a gift to be given, but it's a right to be recognised. And I think that recognising Palestine as a state, the recognition of Palestine was an important step for the freedom movement and the fight for this movement all around the world. So these are my simple views on that.
Okay. Ross, can you give us your take on both of those issues, please?
Okay, with Islamophobia, I think one of the major problems that we are having right now is that in a time of an economic downturn, in a time when simple solutions simply aren't arriving, it is so tempting for a party to blame someone, to find a group, find a community, find someone who shouldn't have, who is, you know, scary foreigners. This doesn't happen here in London as much as elsewhere in the country. What I'd like to see from the other two parties is them standing against some of their own figures in the party who indulge this sort of dialogue to engage with
Who do you mean, Ross?
Well, for starters, Theresa May, who constantly, you know, this sort of fear-mongering that we need to rack up the power of the state and the power of surveillance because that's the only thing that's going to stop terrorism. That is not going to stop terrorism. That is going to continue to treat our greatest ally in the fight against terrorism with suspicion. And that is not how you fight terrorism. That is not legitimate or accurate or even a good strategy. We need to be engaging with the Muslim community. I was very happy when control orders were replaced with TPIMs and we started to see the rolling back of this sudden heavy fist implementation of police powers at the slightest sniff of terrorism and treating an entire community based on some very dodgy information. And now Theresa May comes out again and says, we're bringing it back. If you start to be a bit worried about a friend or a family member who might be hanging out with a bad crowd, instead of you being able to say, you know, he needs a bit of help, you can engage with the community. Instead, the heavy fist comes down, they can be forced to move to another part of the country, they can have so many of their rights suspended, and you yourself will come under suspicion. This is not how you fight terrorism. This is not how you treat your citizens in a country that is multicultural and tolerant. I'd like to see, you know, Bob Blackman, you go back to your Conservative colleagues and say, stop trying to out-UKIP. Stop trying to indulge in some very harmful dialogues because some of your backbenchers might not like it. Take a step into the 21st century and start treating the Muslim community as allies, not as suspicion.
Okay, hold on. I've got an interesting tweet here that says, rather than Muslims, let's blame the Lib Dems for all our problems.
That one.
Just can you briefly give us your take on the Palestinian state Operation Protective Edge over the summer?
Okay. I believe in a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. I don't believe that is possible when one is not recognised as a state. This is simple stuff. The fact of the matter is that there is a cycle of violence, but where one operative in the cycle of violence is a government, is a group of people who are, once again, indulging in paranoia, indulging in fear, indulging in the idea that these people will hate them no matter what, when it's an actual fact that where the main animosity is coming from is that Israel is treating Palestine appallingly. Now, I can stand here and say, if I was in charge of Israel, I wouldn't do that. That's not my place. I'm running for the British Parliament. We need to know what Britain can do. We need to have every chip on our negotiating table pointed towards peace. We need to stop just giving them weapons willy-nilly. We need to hold those weapons hostage until they can use them as a security force and not as a constant stream of aggression towards their neighbours.
Right. In terms of radicalisation, Islamophobia, etc., let's be clear. Islamophobia is a fear of people who are Muslim because they have a different religion, they have a different way of life. And it's fundamentally wrong. But there is a two-way street here. I think this is quite clear. The people of the Muslim religion have to be open and share with everyone, as you do here, the religion, the beliefs that you hold, and be open and transparent. Personally, I haven't bought a newspaper for 3 years. I refuse to finance newspapers that, frankly, peddle their own agendas and peddle to the lowest possible common denominator. And that's the best way to go. Don't buy the newspapers and you starve them of their resources. So that's the first thing. Newspaper owners should be responsible and they should publish things that are appropriately researched and real. Reality is that it's very, very easy to target people because of the way they look, because of their religion, or because you have a general hatred of such people. We must do everything we can to outlaw that and prevent it happening. If that means reviewing the law, that's what we need to do. Often, it's not actually changing the law, it's enforcing the existing laws. And what I would say to all of you is, if you suffer what you consider to be something attacking you for being a Muslim, report it to the police. It's then the police's job to enforce the law. And I say that to every community, because that's the right way to undertake that. Now, in terms of Palestine, I am firmly in favour of a two-state solution with Israel living alongside a state of Palestine after proper negotiations and the terrorist group Hamas and the terrorist group Islamic Jihad accepting Israel's right to exist. The reality is that the founding principles of Hamas are to wipe Israel off the face of the planet. Now, it's very hard then to negotiate. It is true. And one thing you will get from me is I won't say something here and say something different in a synagogue or somewhere else. I will tell you what I believe and what I think has to happen. I was there in the summer whilst the war was going on. I witnessed Israeli citizens and myself having to... Well...
Okay. Okay. Okay, thanks very much. I think we're veering off topic a little bit there. Thanks for your point. Bob, can you just finish the point you were making? Because there's several people in the audience who want to come back.
So the clear position is, I supported an amendment to the motion we're talking about in Parliament to say that the state of Palestine should be recognised by the United Kingdom at the end of negotiations on all the particular outstanding issues between the State of Israel and the Palestinians. But what has to happen, it has to be a two-way street. I can tell you, I have been to the Middle East on 6 occasions. I went with the Palestinian Return Centre. I saw in Jordan Palestinian refugees. I went to East Jerusalem and saw Palestinian refugees and spoke to them and saw it firsthand. So I have seen both sides of this story. In the summer, I witnessed the horrendous position that was taking place, a war between two sets of population, and something like 7 million Israeli citizens, 6 million Israeli citizens under threat of bombs and rockets coming from Gaza. Say what you like, I saw it, and it was even on the media, so the fact is it was going on. And we have had £1.5 billion of investment from across the United Nations going into Gaza, and if that money had been used for peaceful purposes, Gaza would be an outstanding state right now.
Okay, there are lots of people who want to come back, so I'm going to take a round of questions and comments very quickly. So you, sir, and then you, and then we're going to the lady here and the lady in the pink scarf at the back.
You said that you'll recognize Palestine when at the end of peace negotiations. So we should also recognize Israel at the end of peace negotiations. We should not recognize Israel just now. Because, as you said, we don't know what the position is going to be at the end. So we should not recognize Israel as well. Because we don't recognize Palestine until the negotiations are over. Right? So that's what we should do.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to narrate to you a reply from Bob Blackman on Read the Gaza Crisis. So he says that Israel is exercising its right to self-defense. Israeli armed forces have made concerted efforts to comply with internationally recognized principles of proportionality. Quite frankly, someone who justifies the atrocities of a terrorist state that has bombed UN schools, has killed over 2,000 civilians, and hospitals, UN schools and hospitals, and children on the beach, quite frankly, does not represent me or anyone here.
Okay, let's just get a few more comments before we get people to respond. So we'll go, you first, and then the lady there.
I want to bring it back to the UK, and I'm actually furious that our Conservative representative has not read a newspaper for 3 years. You are completely out of touch with how the media actually portray Muslims, and that is infuriating, because if you were to read a newspaper, you would see how, as my colleague said, Muslims are portrayed in a terrible way. If it's a gang who are raping girls, it's a gang, or it's a Muslim gang. It is terrible every single day, 3 or 4 articles, and we are fighting against this as professionals in the NHS, as teachers. We are fighting against these stereotypes, and I think it's infuriating. I've said that 3 times because I'm so angry that you have no clue what we are going through.
Just to highlight today, in the paper, okay, I just want to follow on from this, is that in the paper today, a white EDL or BNP person was jailed for 2 years for making a nail bomb in his room because he was bored. Is he a terrorist? No. Yes, that's what the paper said. He is not. The justice system said he's not a terrorist. What do you have to say to that? This is what we live with, Bob. Let me tell you, this is what we live with. Walk in our shoes and you'll know what it's like.
And one more thing, your advice that we should not read newspapers is actually us, or buy newspapers or read them, is actually us putting our head in the sand and ignoring what is going on about us. And actually, that is more ignorant than actually knowing what is going on.
Okay, lady there.
Thank you. Just to bring back to the situation of Gaza, Mr. Bobman, just a couple of points that are factual. You mentioned about the Israeli citizens who are running away because they're scared of the bombs. You see, they're scared of the bombs, but when you look at the number of civilians that have died, it's extremely disproportionate. And Gazans have nowhere to run. That is the point. At least the Israelis have somewhere to run to. In Gaza, you have the sea, and the boys in the beach were bombed. On the other side, you have the Egypt border, which has been closed. And the border with Israel, I'm sure they would not be able to come to Israel for protection. So I think there are some facts that you need to bear in mind. A couple of quick points I have for you is, do you think retweeting organizations that are extremely anti-Palestinians and they show Palestinians as inhuman, which is what the Israeli propaganda tries to do, when you think your enemy is not a human being, it's very easy to kill them. And I'll just read this out for you, which you've retweeted. Palestinians just desperate enough to commit war crimes, not desperate enough to make any concessions for peace. You're talking about a group of people. You've retweeted this, which means you agree with it. And I wanted to see how you are able to justify retweeting such a thing as an MP, as a member of parliament. And the other question I have for you is, how could you justify going to Israel during the bombing? One question is, you're either going there with the taxpayers' money or being funded by the Friends of Israel. So how do you justify that? And my second point is, when you went there, did you go to Gaza, and can you shed some light on the situation of the Palestinians? I understand you went to see the IDF facilities. Please shed some light for us. And the other question, quick one for all the panel, is regarding the West Bank. The settlements in West Bank are known under international law to be illegal settlements. What is your stance on boycotting goods that come from West Bank to the UK supermarkets and stores? And on a more wider level, what is your stand on the government actually placing sanctions via EU on Israel to stop them acting and standing up to the war crimes that they've committed? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Bob, there was a lot that was addressed to you there. You might not read newspapers, but people read your Twitter account. So, can you shed some light? And in particular, can you please answer who funded your trip to Israel, because that was brought up?
Yeah. First of all, I did not say I don't read the newspapers. I said I refuse to buy them, and it's a very different aspect.
So you steal them?
No, I know. I read them in the Commons tea room on a regular basis.
Oh, so we pay for them.
So, well, actually, you pay for them one way or the other anyway. So the reality is that, no, I refuse, point blank, to fund the newspaper barons in the way that they would like. Now, in relation to my trip to Israel in the summer, it's a matter of public record that it was paid for actually by the Australian government as part of the leadership programme that was bringing together groups of MPs. And by the way, there were equal numbers of Labour MPs and Conservative MPs. But funnily enough, you've never heard who the Labour MPs were that appeared in Gaza or appeared in Israel, because funnily enough, they didn't choose to put their heads above the parapets and say, I've gone to Israel and I've gone to see what's really going on. And I defend the right to go and see things and what's going on. I have been to the West Bank on several occasions. I have been to the border with Gaza. I've never been allowed into Gaza to see it firsthand. Well, the fact is that no one has provided me with a facility to go and see Gaza. So I therefore am very cautious about what I say about what exactly is going on in Gaza. Now, in relation to the numbers killed, let us be clear. Any life lost in a war is a tragedy, absolute tragedy. There are investigations going on right now by the Israeli government into what the IDF did during the Gaza siege, and indeed they're looking at that both independently, and there have been, in particular instances, when it's been substantiated that civilians have been killed in an indiscriminate manner, there has been stringent discipline applied to those individuals who are responsible. Now, we've heard, someone said, oh, there were 2,000 civilians killed. Well, 75% of the people killed in Gaza were men between the ages of 18 and 30. And Hamas terrorists don't wear a uniform.
Okay. We're gonna have to round up very soon. I just want to take final comments because there were two ladies who had their hands up, and then I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give us their final comments. Just take the microphone, please. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. I'll come to you. Hold on. Yep.
Sorry. Just to go back on your point about the fact that they were male and between a certain age range, firstly, doesn't necessarily make them terrorists, which is what you were implying. Secondly, even if they were terrorists, there is no, a democratic country like Israel, as you say, shouldn't be extrajudicially killing 2,000 people, even if 75% were terrorists, if that's what you're saying. Can I go down the street, for example, and kill a convicted rapist? No, I can't. There's a judicial system. And thirdly, Israel, a country that's being invested the UN has said that Israel may be liable for war crimes. Yeah, that they may be liable for war crimes, and then they're investigating their own soldiers. That just doesn't seem to be independent in any way, shape, or form. So I think you need to address the fact that a country investigating its own soldiers who are being accused of war crimes is a bit laughable, really, to be honest.
Just going to bring in the lady in the black scarf who wanted to speak. I'm going to ask him again. Yeah, I'll ask him again. Yeah.
Firstly, how do you think the IDF behaved when it came to the Gaza crisis over Christmas? And secondly, the Gaza crisis over Christmas happened because summer happened because 3 Israeli teenagers were killed, supposedly, by Palestinians. A Palestinian is killed every 3 days on the border. There's 2,000 people were killed because 3 Israeli teenagers were killed over the summer. It's a complete joke.
Okay, so Bob, can you just come back, because you were accused of not answering the question in retweeting things that portrayed Palestinians as inhuman, and there's several points raised there. Very briefly come back on them, please.
Can I come back on that first issue? The fact is that the protective edge was launched not because of 3 Israeli citizens being murdered by terrorists. It was launched because over an extended period of time, indiscriminate rocket and mortar attacks were being launched from Gaza, and the IDF took action in order to prevent that happening. Now, the reality is, and I've seen media clips, not from Israeli media, but from media around the world, that demonstrated Hamas terrorists and Islamic Jihad launching rockets from hospital grounds, from school grounds, and indeed there is independent investigation that has demonstrated that Hamas was using schools and hospitals as dumps for rockets and weapons. So the reality is that the evidence is there.
Bob,
you may not like it.
Bob,
now,
can you
on
just address the point of retweets?
The issue of retweets, yes. During the whole operation of Protective Edge, I took a view to make sure that there was a balanced view being presented. because if I can tell you if we were.
Let's just hear his explanation.
If I can let's be clear. Let be clear. The position is that
the date was 10th of November 2014 that you retweeted, so that was only a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Black.
Indeed. And the position is, if we were in a synagogue with a Jewish audience, they would say complete media bias against the state of Israel. So what I was seeking to do was to make sure that both sides of the story were being heard.
Okay. Okay. I don't think we're going to end this here. I'm just going to ask, because we have got two of the panellists here, I'm going to ask them to comment on the issue of illegal settlement produce and whether they would support a boycott. Very briefly, if you could come back on that for us.
Well, Israel's current strategy is just... I'm wondering what their end game is. I'm wondering, we'll just keep bombarding them and eventually they'll give up. The rocket fires that are coming over from Gaza are not coming over because of Israel's past. They're coming over because of Israel's actions now. And the best way to make Israel safe, if we want to focus on Israel and ask how do we make Israel safe, is for Israel to start acting like a legitimate government. It needs to stop treating Palestinians so atrociously. It cannot, Israel brought down the most draconian blockades possible, and yet people with aggression towards Israel are still getting their hands on weapons. You need to stop with the thought that you can take weapons out of people's hands. You need to start focusing on getting less people who want to fire on Israel. It is as simple as that.
Do you support a boycott of produce from illegal settlements? Because that was the question.
I personally, I have boycotted. The problem is the only industry I've been able to find that is completely within the boycott was SodaStream. If anyone wants to tell me other industries I should be boycotting, I'd be happy to hear it. I don't agree with the illegal settlements. It is once again making Israel a terrible country that wants to.
We'll have that discussion later.
Okay.
Uma, briefly on that also, do you support a boycott of produce from illegal settlements, and would you work towards sanctions at the EU?
I think settlements are wrong and illegal, and if we want a viable, democratic and peaceful two-state solution to be had at the end of this, I don't think we can sit by and let these settlements continue. So that's my thoughts on that. To do with boycotts and sanctions, I personally wouldn't like to see produce from the West Bank continue to come here, but whether or not a boycott is the right way to address this, I'm not too sure on. I think we need to continue talking about this in real terms. How are we going to have a peaceful process going forward? How are we going to negotiate that actually really does deliver a two-state solution for both sides? I think too often we're hearing partisan views, and we're letting this be used for political gains for one way or another. But actually, these are people's lives at stake. These are whole children who are growing up only knowing war. And this isn't something that we can sit by and let continue for another 30, 40, 50 years. And I think we need to have a real serious conversation about it. And actually, as an elected representative, your job is not to promote one view or the other. It is to represent Harrow first and foremost, and also to listen to the views of your constituents, and not actually further partisan views, or actually create division where division doesn't exist. And I think this is what's been allowed to happen here, and I'm very sad to see that have happened.
Okay, so briefly before we end, I'm going to ask each of the candidates to give us a quick 30-second pitch as to why you should vote for them as your MP for Harrow East. So, Ross, let's start with you.
Well, as we've discussed today, it's a wide variety of issues that we are still dealing with, that we still have fallout from. The economy still needs to recover, and it needs to recover fairly. And I don't think either of the two people sat to my left can deliver a fair recovery. with the Conservatives, the bottom line will add up, but as long as the numbers are fine, the people won't matter. And with Labour, unfortunately, they're so busy condemning every economically responsible decision that's been made by this government that it's left them no room to make economically responsible decisions of their own.
Okay, thank you. Bob, 30 seconds, please.
This election will be all about the economy and the future of this country. We have collectively, no one won the last general election, but collectively we've rescued this country from the brink of economic catastrophe, and the very last thing you should do is give it back to the people that wrecked it in the first place. So I ask you, very simply, for an opportunity to continue representing the whole of the community in Harrow and the whole community to the best of my ability.
Okay, thank you. Uma, 30 seconds, please.
This next election is about a choice. You have a choice between choosing an MP who you believe and who you trust will make the best decisions on your behalf and who will represent you. Harrow is my hometown. I have grown up here. My friends and family live here. And the decisions that are being made affect me and my friends and the community that I've grown up in. I will fight for Harrow first and foremost. And as I've explained to you today, I believe in a recovery that works for the many and not just the few at the top. I believe in an NHS that has the time to care. And I think under this government, we're seeing an NHS that's on its knees and been allowed to collapse. And here in Harrow, we're suffering some of the worst consequences in the country as a result of it. I believe in a society that is free and fair for all. And at the moment, I don't think we have a representative that does that. And if elected, I promise to be that MP that listens to you and puts your needs first.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. So thank you to all of our panellists, and I'm sure that you're going to hold them to account to all of the promises they have made. And thank you very much for all your good questions and the engagement tonight.